us here. We're just working on getting our office set up in Nome.
Great. Is this, okay, go ahead. Is it new office, a new reconstitution, or?
Yeah, we've been in the process of organizing the ANCC for the past year and a half, 2 years, and we're now working on setting up our official permanent office in Nome. So we're in the middle of the process, and it's been an exciting time for us.
Great. Listen, Gaylord, do you have any updates? You guys are going to have the floor in a little bit, but and Candace?
Okay, I was going to defer to Amy, but apparently Amy deferred to me. I guess just one thing to share for this group is that things are moving on the agreement to prevent unregulated fisheries in the high seas of the Central Arctic Ocean. This agreement was signed by all 10 parties back in October. It has not yet entered into force. All 10 need to ratify, but there was a preparatory conference of the signatories about 3 weeks ago now, where the group is looking to move forward on several action items, including giving more structure to the scientific group, working harder to make sure that Indigenous and local Arctic residents are included in the process, and then also just for each nation to keep moving towards ratification. So far, Russia, the European Union, and Canada have all ratified the agreement. And then just, at least for NOAA Fisheries, getting ready for our field season up in the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea.
Great.
And hey, Renee, this is Amy Holman, if I might follow up on the NOAA piece. Just one thing, the reason why I'm jumping in here today is making sure everybody's aware that there are a lot of things going on in the ecosystem already this year. And I wanted to see if there was an opportunity for us to talk about a few of those things and to see if there were asks and offers we might have of each other as we're getting ready to go in the field. Renee, how do you want to handle that?
Sorry, say the last part again. What are they asking for?
Well, that's the question. Do you want to even talk about that today? We had talked offline about there's a number of things going on, and did you want to bring up with this group about how we might talk to the field operators?
So one thing we've been talking about is calling another meeting of this group to get the vessel operators together to have that kind of open meeting. Sarah, I don't know if we can schedule.
So, no, we did not, Renee, do a schedule. I think we had a couple of email conversations about it, and we had talked about doing, Amy, remind me, is there a already scheduled meeting of the folks that are going to be in the Bering Sea to talk about coordination of the Bering Sea vessels this summer, field research vessels this summer?
A lot of that's already happened. It happened at the Waterway Safety Committee meeting at the Festival Whaling Committee. It happened in the March timeframe. So those, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, Sarah, I think the best answer is that those of us working kind of that Bering Sea piece are trying to find which teams meeting we should tag up with to have kind of a, June, July update on what everybody is finding so far and what we might want to look for here on out. So it's still in flux is my understanding. And sorry to take up the time.
Okay? No, it's because it's a really good question. So my question for you is, if we did this, would it be Bering, Chukchi, Beaufort, all? It would be okay with the Bering Sea community if we combine this and made it Arctic field season. Is that correct?
what I will say is we're going to start talking in the bearing, and it may be of relevance to others.
All right. Then I think maybe, Renee, offline, let's find a time that will work with you, Molly, Amy, and a few other people to say within the next 3 weeks to try and hold that meeting within the auspices of the Field Operations Working Group or the EI team, either one or both, a coordinated meeting. Because last year when we did it for the bearing, it was very helpful, and I think it could be even more helpful this year. So I'll put that as an action for me to get a time scheduled for a joint FOWG and EICT meeting of operators and PIs for coordination in the 2019 season. Does that sound right?
Sounds good.
Sounds good, Sarah. Let me know what you need for that.
And Amy,
Okay.
I just sent you a potential date, so we kind of work it from there. Should it be earlier than that?
Thanks.
Just kind of lose people to July.
Appreciate it. And for everyone else, thanks for listening through your little, keep your heads up and look for an announcement from us for this other discussion.
And later in this call, we'll look at the vessel matrix, which is sort of the source of some of the information, what vessels are going to the Arctic and when. And we're just trying to do a better job of communicating that ahead of time. And then also have some of the other because things. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, this is Candace. There's a lot of background noise. I don't know if everyone's on mute. It sounds like you're in a very public place.
Everybody.
Yeah, we don't have a host. Normally we can mute people, but we can't because we don't have a host. So we do need everybody to just check that you're on mute, please. Thank you. Good. Thanks.
This is Shayna. That might have been us. Sorry. Blame it on me, Candace.
All right. Does anyone else have an update for the group before we jump into the rest of the agenda? And I think you might have been still dialing in when I called on you, so feel free to jump in with an update. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to give a silly update since this is the operations group. I don't know if you guys have heard of the vessel called Bodie McBoatface, but it was in the news today, and I'll just put the link in the chat.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So now we're going to jump into a few presentations that we have today. I'll introduce Chris Putnam from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Alaska. He's been human polar bear actions, and we had a great follow-up experience with Chris from a polar bear that visited our field research station, the operated station at Summit in Greenland, and really was hoping to put on a training. I wanted to encourage us to interact with this group and address this issue of increasing human polar bear interactions. So take it away, Chris.
Yeah, hi. So this is Christopher Putnam, Fish and Wildlife Service. I was asked to just do a brief presentation on polar bear human interactions. So here in Anchorage, our program is Marine Mammals Management, and we have a polar bear program and a program that I work with, what we call the regulatory program. We work with oil and gas industry, Alaska Native community, researchers, military, others. So I'm not a big fan of death by PowerPoint. We do have a bunch of presentations and stuff, but they're all designed for longer training periods, and we can provide that. I thought what I would do today is just provide a few basic an overview of polar bear safety and awareness, and then if anybody has any burning questions, try to address those. So before I jump into it. Does anybody have any questions you'd like addressed as we chat?
Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to ask whether you're seeing a big increase in human polar bear interactions. Are you seeing a big change in where polar bears are using to hang out?
So I can address Alaska. So our two polar bear stocks, populations, the Chuck TC stock and the Southern Beaufort Sea stock. We share the Southern Beaufort Sea stock with Canada, and we share the Chuck TC stock with Russia. We do have information and participate in international groups, but my efforts are generally focused on Alaska. The short answer is yes. We are seeing changes in polar bear behavior and distribution seasonally, largely based on sea ice, particularly in the Southern Beaufort Sea population or stock. As the sea ice declines seasonally, it's going out earlier and more rapidly, and it is staying out longer and coming back later. So the polar bears seasonally, as they've generally always done, come to shore sometime in the late summer and fall, but they're coming to shore earlier, staying longer, and leaving later. When they're on shore, and recent research has shown that on average over recent history, they're for about a month longer than normal, and that trend appears to be continuing in Alaska, particularly on the slope of Alaska. The Chuck TC bears, a lot of those bears end up on shore in Russia on Wrangel Island and the coast of Chukotka. Similar pattern. And when they're on shore, they are largely fasting. They take advantage of any food sources they can come across, whether it's marine mammals. They do some hunting, but access to their prey items is restricted. And in Alaska, we have Alaska Native communities that subsistence hunt bowed whales. So where there are remains of the whales, what we call bone piles in a few communities, we see concentrations of bears around those bone piles. In Alaska, there is polar bear human interaction around those bone piles, but that is something of a unique circumstance. It's an issue for the communities, and it brings in tourists and things like that. So that's a whole other topic, I think, than research interaction. Oh, somebody put up a picture of a polar bear. That's a bone pile in Kaktovik, I believe, on the north coast of Alaska. So for polar bear human interactions with research projects is something of a different topic. The fundamentals of bear safety, they're pretty similar whether you're talking about a brown bear, a black bear, a polar bear. Situational awareness, understanding where you're going, identifying the bear before you have to enter, having a plan ready to know what to do when something happens. So here in our office, we help people put those interaction plans together. We have a lot of training materials that we can provide. We provide training on polar bear safety and awareness all the way up through to deterrence training. In the United States, we have the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species. We also have an international treaty, a 1973 polar bear agreement with the other range states, the other 5 nations that have polar bears. So there's a lot of laws and regulations around the protection of polar bears, and that's in the United States. The reason I mention it is that depending on where you're operating, you need to understand what the local laws and regulations are, and that may restrict or provide different methods of what to do if you're interacting with bears. Specifically in Alaska, if you're conducting some sort of field research, particularly on land, but anywhere where our Alaska Native communities are conducting subsistence hunting, it's critical that communications take place with those communities to ensure that research activities are not disturbing or disrupting their hunting activities. And there are groups like the ANCC, for instance, specific to polar bears, but there's also the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission. There's a Walrus Commission. So there are points of contact for Alaska Native communities relative to subsistence hunting, and each community has its own government, tribal organizations. There's also Native corporations. So there's a lot of people to communicate with to understand what your activities' impact will be to communities, and also to share what you're doing, where you're doing it. The communities are very interested in what's going on in water. And so from a polar bear interaction point of view, safety, it's a human safety issue largely, but we've also found that as polar bear human interactions increase with polar bears being on shore, there's a few patterns that have emerged. There are particular types of bears that are going to be more likely to interact with humans. They're often younger bears when they're on shore and fasting, so they are typically underweight, not necessarily starving, but they're more food motivated. They also tend to have more interactions with people around communities or some kind of more permanent infrastructure. They seem to be drawn in by what we call attractants. So sight sounds are particularly smells that may attract them. So that's the other big thing that's very important when you're working or living in polar bear country, is to make sure that your area is not interesting to polar bears. And that's largely human waste, garbage, food, kitchen smells, but unusual things like petroleum, oil, lubricants, even vehicles can have scents that attract polar bears. And as the Arctic is changing, then we're also seeing brown bears move farther and farther north. So you can interact with both brown bears and polar bears in the same areas in a lot of the Arctic these days. That trend seems to be increasing as well. And as far as here in Alaska, we train on less lethal deterrent methods so that these interactions can increase the chances of a polar bear having to be killed in human life. And we try to provide other options for people to understand when that's necessary and when it's not, and what to do in situations where it escalates. But primarily we work on educating and training on how to avoid those situations entirely. So the key would be to understand where you're going, understand the whether it's very remote or whether there's communities in the area. Since polar bears are so wide-ranging, you can have interactions with bears in what seems like a remote area, and they're very smart, and they can learn. We call them single trial learners. So if they have a bad experience with a human, they can carry that experience on in a distant location. So if a bear gets food from a human in a research camp, it may associate the sights and sounds of humans the next time it's around a community. But that's something we also like to communicate. And as I think it was Sara mentioned earlier, there was a circumstance in Greenland where a bear showed up at a research location very, very far inland on the ice sheet, which was unusual. It had happened before. But if you're looking at the news right now, there's news stories of a bear showing up inland in Russia, very far away from where it would normally occur. It appears to be hungry. So this phenomenon of sea ice changing and bears having to come on shore and looking for food, it's not any particular location. It's throughout the entire Arctic, throughout polar bear range, and it's driven by changes in sea ice. So that's just kind of a quick overview. I mean, we can go into a lot more detail and specifics if you'd like, but I thought it might be more productive to address questions that you may have, and I can provide information later on materials and that we have. We have a lot of international contacts as well, so if you're conducting activities somewhere outside the United States, we could probably provide you with a contact of someone on one of the polar bear. There's international polar bear conflict working groups and other local people that we work with in different countries. We provide contacts for those as well. But does anybody have any questions, or I can just prattle on about bears for a while?
I would love to hear you prattle on more, but there's just one person who's not on mute, and it's making it difficult to hear. It's 907-359-900. If you're listening, can you please mute yourself? We can't do it for you. They did it. Yay. Okay.
Okay, so do I need to repeat anything that I just said, or was that clear enough for people to hear?
I think those were good. Oh, yeah, I guess. So I was able to hear clearly. And I think those were good highlights. Have there, in the past few years of reduced sea ice, is there an observable change in the population of polar bears that, north of Alaska?
So,
This decline, or no yearlings are not surviving, or any sort of noticeable trends?
yes, there are. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, our polar bear program research efforts are concentrated on the Chukchi Sea population of bears. The USGS here in Alaska concentrates their efforts on the Beaufort Sea population, southern Beaufort Sea population of bears. So the latest, greatest information we have on the Chukchi Sea population of bears is that they're doing pretty well, it seems. Their population or stock is at least stable at this point. There's a lot more ice and it persists longer over the continental shelf areas where seals can access their prey and bears can access the seals when there's ice. So their body conditions tend to be better overall. Their reproduction tends to be better overall, more successful, more cubs, heavier, healthier cubs. So the Chukchi Sea population seems to be doing okay for the time being. The southern Beaufort Sea population, or stock, is doing less well. The latest information shows a decline in that population. Hopefully sometime in the near future there'll be a revised population estimate for the southern Beaufort Sea. But in general, we think it's declining. The body masses of the bears have shown a decline, so they're not as heavy as they once were. The reproduction seems to be less successful, so less bears reproducing, producing smaller litters and smaller cubs. And that's just general overview of it. So if you look at the two stocks that are right next to each other, the Chukchi Sea area has a larger extent of continental shelf, and the sea ice stays over those shallower waters for a longer period of time. So it appears that those polar bears have access to food resources longer period of time and are able to better exploit them because of the sea ice. If you go over to the northern coast of Alaska along the southern Beaufort Sea, it's a narrower continental shelf area, so the sea ice moves past it over deeper water quicker earlier in the season, and that probably has a lot to do with the trends that we're seeing with the bears in the southern Beaufort Sea. Less time for sea ice to be over those shallower, richer continental shelf waters, so less access to prey. So that seems to be the pattern.
Great. So I had the opportunity to take I think it was a 4-hour training, and it was really useful. And so that might be something that through this field operations working group, maybe we can poll our user community and get a critical mass of people who might want to sign up for a training, kind of attract our field going community, and engage in a longer training like that. So,
and we're happy to do that. If the activities are planned for Alaska, if there's an overlap, we can do it in Alaska in person. It works better if we're in person,
okay.
And we can travel in Alaska. We have adapted it so that we can do it remotely like this. I think it's a little bit less beneficial, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Chris? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And next we're going to move to visualization tools, and Bill Manley's going to walk us through the Arctic Research Mapping application and the Arctic Observing Viewer and hit some highlights of those. Again, he could probably spend another hour or two giving trainings on those, but we just wanted to hit the highlights for people today.
Just the highlights. How much time can you give me? So Yeah, I was planning to go a little bit more into like the critical challenges facing us all, actually. So I'll have to gloss over that. But I would like to give a brief overview of ARMAP and AOV, which are two web mapping applications with underlying databases. And ARMAP on the left is the Arctic Research Mapping Application and focuses on projects, high order project tracking. AOV on the right is the Arctic Observing Viewer and focuses on observing sites with a higher resolution view of long-term monitoring and actual specific observing instruments or platforms or measurements. So these apps have a goal of providing comprehensive perspectives for science and logistics planning, strategic development, assessing status or gaps and overlap, and clarifying directions. And then I'd also like to touch on other similar portals and maybe a little bit on the challenges and opportunities of obtaining a comprehensive perspective, actually, and get some feedback with a few questions. So it's actually the grad students that do the software development and the database management. I won't go into the roles for sake of time, but this is funded by NSF with the intention that it be a tool that could be of interest or use or help beyond NSF, interagency and internationally. And so we're happy to work with other partners, and we worked with a number of different agencies and partners. So I would like to give you a quick live demo of our new prototype 3D viewer for ARMAP. And so this has not yet been released, but we're getting close. It's still just a prototype, but we're hoping to present this soon, and it's 3D, so you can zoom in and you can move around to wherever you want. Everybody can see Alaska there on the screen. And and that gives a lot of benefits here in that we now have access to a wide range of high resolution base maps, and you can have custom navigation. You can zoom to all sorts of different regions. I'm gonna try to move that. Okay, and also we can then look at these advanced visualizations for symbolization, where in this case, let me zoom out a little bit here. The height of these cones, each cone represents a project location, a logistical base of operation. The height of the cone represents how many projects are operating out of that base. And the color of the cone in this case represents how many of the projects at that location are funded by NSF. And most of the projects in here are funded by NSF, but not all. So the red ones are funded by NSF. And you can, you can zoom way in and get lots of great detail. You can zoom back to any different region. You can choose different bookmarks, base maps. National Geographic is pretty good. And, if you zoom in then to the North Slope, then is a project tracking application. This shows you who's doing what, where, and when. And you can, for example, let's see what else. You can use this time slider, and then, let's see here. Yeah. And then it shows which projects are active in 2019. You can click on one of these cones, and you can see that 57 projects are active out of Reykjavik in 2019. And then you can kind of scroll through them, and you can follow links to more information. You can get a little list within the pop-up there. We're really excited about this new app. And so, and then you can, select or filter for different agencies, including BOEM or by year, by discipline, et cetera. And then out of 2,900 projects total, then once you do a search or filter, this will narrow down, and the results are in this table down here, and you can save to Excel, etc. So that's a quick demo. We also have ship tracks.
Okay. Bill, before you move on to land-based projects, could you click on one of the records and pull up a whole record?
One of the records, and pull up a whole record.
Click on a dot.
Uh-huh.
And so these are, that's a different output, I guess, than the old version of ARMAP, which had more information about the science and has like an email for the PI. And
that's right. So some of this stuff is in the table, some of it's in the pop-up, and this is a prototype. So we can put more information in the pop-up. And but note that you can click on a link to go to an award page.
There you go.
Yeah, you can here. You can click on a link to get a logistics report. This is an older project, but more information about the actual field season coming. And so, yeah. So that's ARMAP 3D, and you would like to see some more info on the pop-up, and we can add that to the prototype. And good. But ARMAP, so we don't have much time, but we envision this project data lifecycle where project planning is on the left and dataset usage and understanding is on the right. And so ARMAP's on the left, and you can envision that each point as a project location, as a logistical base of operation, like a village or an airstrip or base camp. And then AOV is in the middle, where that project could have lots of observing sites, discrete places at high resolution where there are measurements being taken. And then further right, well, those observing sites can have data sets that come out sometime later and are appropriately hosted by data repositories, by data centers. So across the spectrum, there's different users and different user needs, different questions they have. And so it's helpful to design resources like this, or tools like this, to address the user needs. ARMAP is multi-agency. AOV has been growing and now has over 31,000 observing sites, such as boreholes or moorings or flux towers or stream gauges or that kind of thing. And it's for network planning and integration and more. And then these things link then to data sets, but we are not a data center. So it all really comes down, the heart and soul is content, really. And the content are these project details and site details. And there's not that many, really. It's high order for each of them, meant to provide basic information about a project or a site, and then links to more information, discovery level. And these details in ARMAP and AOV, essentially what they are really are project level and site level metadata elements. This is project level and site level metadata, and each one of these things is a metadata element. You can think of it also as a field in a database. I'm going to dig into this a little bit because it's really important. And so we can, we share all of our data sets, the project locations and sites, through these live web services. They're live web feeds in following best practices for use of metadata standards and web service formats, transfer protocols. And other platforms, other portals have taken in what we have put together and combine it with other information, and that's good. That's all good. And you can access this information in whatever way you want, actually. And but ARMAP and AOV are not the only project portals or site portals, of course. And so there's the Arctic LCC and NASA Above and the North Pacific Research Board and North Slope Science Initiative, Tulip Field Station. And then there's other site portals as well, including NASA Above and NEON. There's, I think, renewed interest in these sorts of things. And that's good. There's not going to be one portal to beat them all or whatever. It's pretty obvious that the way it is to work together through interoperability and share information, with the goal being knowing who's doing what, where, when, so that we can better assess status and plan and clarify directions to achieve field logistics or scientific objectives. The challenge is that in this realm, we are highly fragmented across agencies and across countries. And what it comes down to is the interoperability. What we need is, well, there's the lack of interoperability currently for machine readable, project level, and site level metadata. So I have to skip through some of this, but the bottom line here is that there are lessons to be learned from the broader Arctic data community. And they are so much further along in terms of data repositories, making it easier for the end user to access data, for data to be more fair, so-called, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, fair. In the same way, the different agencies, et cetera, that are working on these project tracking and site tracking or tracking, that we could also make what we want to share findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable to the benefit of all, and particularly for the benefit of a more comprehensive or broad, inclusive perspective to be able to assess status and do these things. So I'm going to skip over that. Some portals aggregate from other sources, and some portals share their information online, but really it's like the dark ages. It's like the Wild West. And lots of people are either not really using metadata structures, or they're not sharing it, or they're creating their own thing, reinventing the wheel each time. And so we've heard recently in particular that there are people who just they don't want to duplicate time and effort. They just want to easily adopt and implement an existing approach. And so on our end, we've done what we can to help with this guide to interoperability online. We took an existing project level metadata standard and expanded it into ISO, which is the way to go. And then we have a data dictionary online that can help figure out how you want to set things up for yourselves, or there's a contributors template spreadsheet that makes it easier to share your information and get it into ARMAP and AOV if you want. That's great. Or into some other portal in a way that you know is easy to just run with. And we just a couple weeks ago proposed as a small part of this research activities network thing to NSFA on an interoperability working group that might be under SAN or AOS that's focused on networking, but it's to have a little working group that gets together and actually, for people of similar sort of portals like this, work out the details and make progress. And so for science planning, these sorts of resources can help. And the questions are, do you, your agency, do you find these sorts of things of value? Are you interested in starting improving a database or a portal, or sharing your information, viewing in another portal, taking advantage of an existing approach? Or are you interested, is there interest, say, under IARPC, to have an interagency network project tracking working group? And I think that would help a lot, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Bill? Bill, do you maybe want to back up your slides to one of the visualizations just to trigger?
To which one?
Either the AOV, something that kind of highlights the project.
Uh-huh.
So, do you think that? So you guys have worked out some data standards, metadata standards. Do you think it's more just an issue of distributing that as something that people can adopt, that people are not aware of it?
Yes, and I think a lot of people are, by necessity doing their own thing, and maybe they're not aware, but there's a lot of ground up effort, and there are not many metadata standards, and we have shared what we can. But the thing is, I think we put out this interoperability guide, and kind of
NC2. Sorry, I was listening.
Standard that we released, but we ourselves are not an authoritative body, so that we cannot establish a standard. There needs to be some top-down as well as some bottom-up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I don't. There's not a single meeting I go to where there isn't a data breakout group or session. And I'll just read. Allison is using the chat because she's having some trouble with audio. Okay, and she mentions that a lot of people are focused either only on marine or terrestrial or atmosphere.
Or take a ferry at 4 in the afternoon to get into the Brosnick round.
It's great that there's different portals. Each portal might have their own
early morning ferry,
their own geographic scope or thematic scope.
To get into Brosnick with enough time to enjoy the afternoon instead of spending extra time on the ferry.
If we could move a little bit more in the direction of the way the broader Arctic data community has made tremendous progress in the last 10 years, there's like a roadmap to follow there.
Saturday night, and then I fly
Then
out.
you don't have to go to 10 portals to see who's doing what, where, when. You can go to only one or two to have a more comprehensive perspective.
Kathy Kuhn asked, would this expand upon the previous efforts of agencies?
So that's a really good question. And
It's about a
I think
20-minute train ride
so I will
to
jump
the
in.
Amtrak station, and then I got to make my
Is the
transfer to
Alaska
the Amtrak by
Innovation
hopefully
started
6:30 or whatever time it was. Otherwise, I don't know if I'm gonna be back.
a long time ago. They were ahead of their time.
There's more trains, but they were all more
made
expensive,
tremendous
so
progress
I booked one they gave me
creating
a couple hours,
project
2.5
level
hours.
metadata
Yeah.
standard and then moving into a data
Hopefully, I
set
can make it.
level metadata standard and kind of everything in between. And
Anyway, I'll be home.
there's been a little bit of loss of momentum
Yay!
or a shift in direction
Indeed.
recently, and they have
My
created
sheep's belly.
these amazing
I think
tools,
she's okay.
these metadata management
Good dog.
tools and
Okay.
conversion tools that would
Gonna take her out
incredibly helpful
after
for
this.
any other agency, really. And so it makes it easier. And
Sounds good.
I think there is recently renewed interest in maybe perhaps revitalizing.
Well, I know that you wish you were here eating.
And it's kind of some top-down vetting and mandate as well as
Promise you, it has done my body no
kind of both
favors.
policy and technical level separately, but coming together to
Oh, yeah.
get things going. And
I also feel like I gained a ton of weight this week, and I don't know why. I
but
don't
whether
know
it happens on
what
an
I did.
AWIG or
Oh, it's not that
ARPC or
way.
something like that, I think something like that would be.
Oh,
It's
you're
just
fine.
tearing me up.
Clearing out your zen.
So we have just 5
Roger
minutes
says,
left for our
they
scheduled
clearly don't have a
time.
lot of carbs here.
I
It's
think,
just
Jennifer, we're going to postpone
More
the
meat. More meat. And
presentation
when
about
there's vegetables,
the
they're
FARO
grilled.
being
So
the
they've got
Forum of Arctic Research
all
Operators
those good things for your
until another meeting. I'm not sure that Jennifer
Oh my god.
Mercer has
So
been
funny.
able to join us today
Yeah, it's
anyway,
insane.
so we'll
We just had,
postpone that. So what I'm going to do
we went searching
the last
fish.
few minutes is just show everyone where
Had
they
a
can
very
find the
good
vessel
piece of
matrix
fish.
and just
Roger
give
did.
you a brief overview of what that
They told us
is.
to drizzle it in
I'm
olive
sure
oil.
my screen.
So, you
So
know,
thank
that's
you,
gonna
Bill,
come
for
back
that
to bite
update,
us.
and
That's what you gotta do, though.
I'll think more about how we can sort of advance the use of
I-
the data as well.
Great. And if there's people who
I
are
ordered
interested in
homemade macaroni.
pursuing this sort of
What?
thing for their own interests, regardless of ARMAP and AOV, let's talk and eat
This was interesting. They had pasta. On their cold
So there's
appetizers,
been for several years an
they
effort
had,
to collect information on the different cruises that are going, particularly to the Western
on their
Arctic,
cold
and
appetizers,
especially
they had
cruises
some sort of
that are
spiral
going near
pasta
the coast or near
Mhm.
with
communities.
black
And so
cuttlefish.
the field operations
Ooh.
working
And
group
on their
is navigating
warm
that stage
appetizers,
right now through the
they had some sort of Italian
portal,
green
and
with,
we worked with the
something.
different vessel
Shrimp.
operators to put
and
together
then
a matrix that is
another
shareable here on the
appetizer was
website.
spaghetti with something. And then,
And so we also collect
thank you
information
very much,
about
Roger.
aircraft that
We're already doing my
we
first
use
ever
for
Pepsi.
different agencies. So here
Because we don't have any
research aircraft for
So,
2019.
I'm going with the acid blocker.
Yeah.
And
Gotta do what you
there's a
can.
little bit of information about the type of
And then
aircraft,
the
Your
entree
body
was-
is changing.
position, and roughly when it
Body's
will be
changing.
there. And then there's a point
The
of
entree
contact that you can reach out to
pastas,
for
it
more
was all
information.
homemade
If your
macaroni.
agency or project is
And
interested
then
in, hey, could
at
I
the end
get
of
a
the
few
menu, there
hours
was
or a few
yet
days
another option.
tagged onto
So,
that contract?
Well, I
That's
can't
what we're
remember,
looking for with sharing that kind of information. How can we leverage assets that
I
are
ordered
already
the homemade macaroni with
and
shrimp
then with
and
the vessel
zucchini.
matrix, we have worked to bring
And,
together all the
They were
cruise
little baby,
information
like,
on the
Thai
different
salad
vessels.
shrimps, like little baby
The
things.
way we did this was share
nice
edit
strips
rights
of
to a
zucchini.
Google Doc
And
with
the
different
homemade macaroni
vessel
was
operators.
wonderful.
So
It
we
was
have
like
Healy,
a
we have
slightly
NOAA
narrower
fisheries
sea.
vessels that are going
It
out
was
to
very
be
long.
surveyed, as well as the Sakuna
Hollow,
and
like
foreign
macaroni.
research vessels.
But not curved like little
We've
elbows.
included the vessel call
And
signs for most
definitely
of the ones that
homemade
have scheduled work
roll soft
that
pasta,
will allow
That's
people
cool.
more easily to
which was
use
wonderful. But it was the
information
end
on the
the
vessel
richest,
tracking system. And so there's
fattiest,
information about
creamiest of sauces.
departure
So
dates and locations,
what I
where
was
they
able
will
to
be.
eat
For the Healy, they want to
is
keep
going to destroy me.
exact date and location of where the Healy is going to be.
It will be a war,
They can give you the location, but not the date.
but it'll be
not the location.
a very
But what
short
we have
war.
done is include an
Short
illustration
war.
of Bering Strait. So that gives you a sense of when it's going to be, closest to shore and
So anyway, dinner was
going
good.
up into
But,
the Chukchi Gopher
I'm
area
ready to
and coming back down.
Come on.
And then
Not eat
for
so
each
richly.
vessel, there's a little bit about whether it will come to bear
Fair enough.
in an earlier recite.
Oh, can I just have some like Cheerios?
Do that again.
Gonna have all the
Where it will
Cheerios
be
you
in the
want.
Chukchi, where it will be in the Beaufort, and
Cheerios.
the vessel operator and some
Cheerios.
contact information in case you have questions. And then we're also working to
I need to
get
prepare for my
cruise
brown bag
tracks
tomorrow.
for each planned
I need to
cruise
prepare for my
updates.
brown bag
And
tomorrow.
so each of those is
I'll
on
be
a
fine.
separate tab, so you can take a look at.
I'm glad you got that cool call in with Admiral Josh Dad, or email.
And the 28, we
That's
can
cool.
see 2016 and 2017 are here. 2018
Alright, don't you feel
was
cool?
orchestrated largely by NOAA and Coast Guard, and I just need to get that 2018 sheet and put it out here. But
I feel like
we're
an
starting to
idiot.
develop a bit of a track record now of producing this
Why?
I don't know. Just thought it was funny.
information for communities, and most people are
You're
curious
not
about
an idiot.
the
You're
cruises
awesome.
that are planned through the Arctic Waterway Safety Committee meetings and other community meetings in Alaska.
I finally emailed
This is
him
a
my
good
presentation
resource
after a
as a
month.
reminder of
Oh,
when
yeah.
to go to say,
Email me
at
back.
this time of year,
What do you
what
say?
ship am I seeing?
I was like, thanks for
that kind of
sharing.
thing. And then we
I
talked
really
earlier in our call
enjoyed your
about having a
presentation.
follow-up
I found, I
to
didn't
talk
know,
about
I
what
didn't know that they could live so
cruises
long.
are actually happening,
The
what
call was
they're
really
seeing,
fascinating.
and
By
any
the way,
adjustments that
I
vessels
loved
are
your
needing to
slide
make.
with
For example,
Naval
if a
Dot.
vessel needs to
I
find
don't know if
ice
you know this, but I
and the
used
ice
to be
is there, they
in
might
charge
have to
of
go
the Naval
farther north
Observatory.
than they had originally
Yeah.
planned.
And I was just like,
So there
this
can be
fucking
real-time
guy.
changes that have
Fucking
real
guy.
impact for
Ridiculous.
communities in Alaska. So we want to just keep the communication open in real
Yeah.
time,
So anyway.
as well as giving the advanced information. So,
I can't believe you took
that's
Marlon and
just
fucking
a
fish
kind of
rodeo.
overview introduction that I wanted to give to people to make sure that they know that we're
She's
putting
crazy,
together this
man.
kind of information. And we're hopeful too that it's
Glad that
useful
you
for
are
researchers who want to, maybe you need a sample collector
Not
or you're
like
hoping
that.
that, maybe you could collaborate with
Are you
somebody
sure?
collecting
Do you have any idea how great it is
and
that
by
you
sample I
are
mean like water
not
collection, and a few of these
fucking
are
nut?
also collecting
I'm
sediments
sure
or doing plankton.
Oh, I'm
codes,
sure.
that I'm not a nut.
It's an
Oh,
opportunity
yeah.
to reach out to the vessel and leverage again
Oh,
that
no.
opportunity, or to say, hey, do you have a
I heard about
I have a grad
maybe
student who's
job opportunity for
projects.
Kathleen.
So it could be useful in a lot of different
Did you
areas
really?
to
Yeah.
increase collaboration.
What opportunity is that?
That's what
Eugene
we
Berger
tried to
at
accomplish
Danielle
with this stuff.
Eugene Berger.
mentioned
PNEL.
that they were.
Well,
Well, first of all, he asked me what I was doing after fellowship, and I was like, "Oh, I'm not really sure yet." And he was like, "Well, we need people," and I was like, "Oh yeah."
Kelly, take a job. People are throwing jobs at Kelly, Roger.
It's not true. It's like he's like, "Oh, it's a."
When it will be available, and I
Roger,
just
you need to learn
send
to
out a
negotiate.
Yeah, I know, right?
saying that as soon as it's
You don't
final,
say
it'll
no. You
it'll
say,
be up and
you
we'll
say,
post an announcement
well-
and stuff, so you'll know it's up.
well, what
It's
can
really
you do
helpful
for
if the NSF and board
Well, he
members
said
are
something
very
along the
friendly
lines of,
with
it's like
people.
data
And I don't think we've
integration,
done that in the past.
management,
I
that
think
kind of
that's a good
stuff.
idea.
And I was like,
It's a
"No,
lot
I
of work
don't know
to
any
get
programming."
this level of information.
Honey,
So, but I texted Kate
It
about
was-
it just now. I
You
said,
didn't know my
I have a lead on the job with Danielle, more programming in.
Every year it's a struggle.
I'll have to ask Eugene for the details again, but he mentioned it in passing. It's in the 60 to 80K range, and I asked her if she wanted me to send him her resume.
I was gonna say, I think in the past, Bill, we sent researchers a spreadsheet to fill out to try to collect their ship
Alright,
tracking
you
information.
know,
oh,
And
her
we
job
could try to
probably
make that
sucks
more
ass.
organized.
her job does suck ass.
We do each spring as well.
That would help, I
I
think,
think,
Her jobs.
Yeah.
as well as maybe sort of the pain.
I think that, I mean, she said that her division is essentially like shutting down.
Maybe we'll have a presentation on the pay and ship tracking information at a
Yeah, that
later
company's.
on meeting.
You should nail someone to do that, yes.
Well, we have reached the end of our time, so thank you everyone who was able to join today. This is a good cross section of the kinds of things that are
What to do, honey?
What?
do all the agencies
Having so much
who are
fun out here in
sponsoring or
Croatia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might take
appreciate you participating today. So thank you to our presenters, Chris and
Hold on one
Bill, and as much as she was able to
What?
participate, Allison as well.
That's really funny.
So
What?
and we'll move the FARO update to the next meeting. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Renee.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Renee.
Thanks.
I have to see if this
Thank you,
recording
bye.
worked.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah?
Kelly.
Hey.
Hey, were you able to capture it on audio?
I'm going to check